Gather up your coffee and your cookies and take a seat, please. Welcome to the Candidates Forum. This is your opportunity to hear from each of the candidates running for the Board of Directors. It's an important election coming up because this board will be working through the plans for the next couple of years as we move into celebrating our 50th anniversary. And they will be looking and focusing on things that are future-oriented and not necessarily dwelling on past issues. So keep that in mind as you listen to them all this afternoon and help to clarify the type of questions that you might want to ask them. This forum is put on by the Forum Committee, which is an independent group of sea ranchers who put together meetings on topics that we hope will be of interest and of value to you. The moderator for the forum this afternoon is James Platt, and he will introduce the candidates to you in the order in which they have drawn and selected to be making their presentations. Typical housekeeping things, you all, I think, as I look around who is in the room this afternoon, you all know where the exits are and the restrooms across the gardens, but we have to state it each time. There are refreshments in the back of the room, which you can help yourself to now or at the break, and or at the end of the session. Stay around and talk to the various candidates and ask your specific questions of them if they haven't been addressed up to that point. When I look at this wonderful list of candidates, the only thing that stands in my mind is it reminds me of junior high school, when all the boys were out playing sports and the gals were the only ones left to run for office. So my question is, where are all you men? The next forum in May will be presented by our website committee, and it will be an opportunity for them to bring you up to date on what's been happening, the new developments on the website, but more specifically hoping to gather from you some information and some input as to what you would like to see out there, and what some of the limitations of the website are, and what some of the new things that are available for us, for the various organizations to post. So keep in mind, think about website, and that will be in May. Again, I'd like to introduce James Platt, who most of you know, and he will introduce the candidates to you, and will moderate their the first portion of the program. They will be making their statements, telling you about themselves, their intentions, their hopes, their backgrounds, and then we will have a break at about 4 o'clock when they're finished, and then we'll come back and it's your turn to ask them questions. So, Jim.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm James Platt, and I'm pleased to be here as your moderator. So the format here, what we're going to do is we will have each of the candidates will present a 5-minute presentation, and then we will actually be able to start the Q&A shortly after that. And we will run the Q&A up till 4 o'clock. We'll take a 10-minute break and come back and continue the Q&A. And the format of the Q&A is that you go to the far line over there on the wall and queue up by the microphone, and you can ask one question and then go to the end of the line, and when everybody's finished, you can come back and ask a second question. I'll go in detail with our ground rules when we get there, but I'm going to start now with the presentation. So what we did with the candidates is that we just did a random drawing, drew lots to establish seating order up here at the podium, the order in which they will be talking, and the order that they'll give their closing remarks. So a 5-minute opening, a 5-minute closing, and in between will be the Q&A. So the order here today then for the opening, our first candidate is going to be Elaine Reed, followed by Cecilia Moelter, followed by Jackie Gardner, followed by Marti Campbell. And with that, let us begin.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. It's a beautiful day, and a lot of other things are going on the ranch, and we're real happy to see you here. I don't remember when I first became aware of Sea Ranch. It was either at Berkeley in the 60s when I was an undergrad student, or in the mid-70s when I did some coursework in landscape architecture. But whenever it was, I was enchanted. I loved the beauty, the land use, the architecture, the use of standard materials in construction, and everything about it. I read every book and clipped every article and started coming up here for short stays. I treasured my time here, but I didn't think about buying a house because it was 4 hours away from where I lived in Auburn. Then I read Under the Tuscan Sun by Frances Mays. She loved Tuscany, and she lived 22 hours away, and she had to learn Italian, and she had to learn Italian real estate law to have a house there. Well, I already lived in California, and I lived 4 hours door to door, and I already spoke the language, and I already knew how to buy a house in California. So the book changed my ideas, and I decided to buy a house and spend a lot more time here. And that's what I did. About 3 months after I bought my house in 2003, I attended the event celebrating Sea Ranch's 40th anniversary. We wrote down our favorite things about Sea Ranch, discussed future challenges, covered the walls with butcher paper filled with ideas, and for icing on the cake, we had a short break where, because there was only 2 restrooms in the barn, I got to chat with Larry Halprin for about 5 minutes while we waited in line. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. Sea ranchers are a varied lot, but they agree on some important points. They love Sea Ranch, and they feel very lucky to have a house here. They want to keep the feel of Sea Ranch the way it is, yet they recognize the need to respond to changes and challenges that come along, such as the need for better telecommunications or the need for taking care of our ailing trees. They like the current levels of service and amenities, and they want to maintain them. And they want to keep the member assessment as stable as possible, yet not sacrifice amenities and services. In my service on the board, I'll be guided by these shared values. I graduated from library school 1 month after Proposition 13 was passed. I spent my whole career providing public library service in the fiscally challenging world that followed. As director of the Placer County Library System, I received a small, designated share of the property taxes collected, with which I was challenged to provide the best library service possible to the citizens of Placer County. I got really good at cost-benefit analysis, prioritization, analysis of competing interests, and resource allocation. And in developing a budget, I like to identify the total budget, the fixed cost, and the cost for various options under consideration for addition or reduction. I like to develop these figures early on in the budget process so options can be compared and evaluated for their importance. I would discuss the choices until there was some kind of consensus as to what was going to be included and what would have to be deferred. I would not add $450 to the monthly assessment at the final budget meeting. The final budget meeting is on a tight time frame for approval in order for it to become effective at the beginning of the fiscal year, May 1st. If all the options for addition have been considered and voted on at an earlier meeting, and if there had been options for reduction included to offset the additions, it's possible the pool hours could have been expanded without adding to the assessment. So I'm running out of time here, so I will continue in my closing statements where I'll discuss my previous service on boards, the Burbank housing issue, and my community support for running for the board. Thank you.
Jim, for arranging this, and thank you all for coming. You could have been at a chowder feast otherwise. First, John and I came to Sea Ranch in 1991 on a road trip from Oregon to Southern California where we lived. And I came in here and I said, wow. And John said, I read about this in Architectural Digest. And I said, I just love it. Nobody edges their lawn. So that was an initial. We moved here in 1995. We rented 4 homes in various parts of the Sea Ranch, and then we bought in 1998. If you read my first statement, you know that I love Sea Ranch, and something that we love demands care and attention and a certain amount of currency. And my platform could be maintaining the current values of our ownership. Running for the board a second time was a bit easier because I have spent 3 years researching and reading our documents, and I will continue to do so. There are former and existing issues, and it is especially pleasing to say that the water company has remained the same and the Tank 8 is being financed and should be underway during this summer. There were fiscal changes outside Sea Ranch's control having to do with building and sales of Sea Ranch property. When I came on the board in 2009, there were 14 homes under construction. There are now 6, a 57% decrease. The number of home additions has dropped, and the sale prices of homes have also dropped by about 12%. The fabled stories of members' difficulties with design approval are less frequent and more prudently settled. In former years, these incidents were well rehearsed and repeated, and now cooperation seems to be the theme. The other obvious topic that members mentioned were the increasing dues. And I know that the average for dues during the last 4 years, from 2009 till now, was $186. That was a decrease of 9%, an increase of 9%, a decrease of 11%, and then an 8% increase, for an overall 6% increase in our dues. This percentage particularly impacts the people that I called FIs, or fixed incomers, whose cost of living increases are usually in the 3% arena, and that should be considered. What would I do to reduce dues assessment? Today it's impossible to list all the specifics, but I have great faith in the idea to combine groups and committees that address fuel management, view restoration, and commons landscape with rigorous adherence to the rules about height, location, and inappropriate species growing on Sea Ranch. Our community manager has mentioned that this will be an ongoing project, and I definitely favor organization to meet that. One concern for my last campaign was the bulletin, and I'm happy to say it has gone from 36 pages to about 24. It is on recycled paper, and I think the reporting is commendable. I'm not giving up, though, on having it circulated on the internet, except for those people who prefer to receive it by post, and when stipulated. My other suggestions would be for maybe committees being self-supporting, and if they were, I would gladly contribute to that. I'm very excited about the 50-year adventure that we're going into to celebrate Sea Ranch's history, and so I will give my time to that program also. The final issue that concerns me and that is hanging out there are the Sea Ranch apartments. The status of the Sea Ranch apartments and the Sea Ranch Association has not had a solution, but it is number 1 on my list, and because it is so important, the state of the units and the welfare of the tenants is primary, and I promise to promote reaching an agreement with that. Passion best describes my attitude about the Sea Ranch. My campaign motto could be lively older lady lives lightly on the land. And I've been on the board of the California Native Plant Society, the RCLC, and their mission is the same, maintaining a natural and native environment that is monitored with the need for fire safety. Thank you. I hope to hear questions.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Jackie Gardner. I first arrived here in 1980 for a honeymoon and enjoyed it so much I rented houses for a period of years before buying a lot, building a house, and I moved here full-time in 1998. I was asked to serve on the Fire Safety Task Force by Jim Jordan in 2007, and at that point I had not attended a board meeting. And so I decided I better start coming and learn what was going on. In the course of working on the Fire Safety Task Force, I made 2 presentations to the board, and I found that attending the board meetings was really interesting and compelling, and it's the one place where you get to hear all the thought processes behind how our decisions are made. So I've continued to come since then. I'm currently sitting on the Sea Ranch Fire Safe Council, and I have a history of community involvement both in Stockton, where I came from, as well as here. When I was in Stockton, I was the president of the organization at the time. It was a 2,000 member organization, and we passed a half-cent sales tax initiative to fix the roads there, and at the time it passed with 70% approval. When I moved to the coast, I got involved with the Humane Society and a couple of other organizations. And as some of you may know, I've nursed everything from the sales tax initiative to baby lambs. The situation now is that we have had a board for the last couple of years that has struggled to work together and to develop consensus on how to approach the problems that we face as a community. There's 3 seats open for this election, and I think that gives us a great opportunity to change the tenor of the discussions and try to develop a better rapport among the board members where we can openly and politely disagree and still develop a consensus that's going to be the best for the community. The issues that I think are foremost, number 1, I would say, is Burbank housing and resolving the problems there. I was sorry to see the door slam shut at the end of discussing Plan B, and I'd like to reopen that door and get everybody back at the table. I think it's in our best interest as a community, in the best interest of the people that own property near there, and in the best interest of those folks that live there, for us to sit down with Burbank and the county and figure out a way to move forward. It won't be easy, it'll probably be messy, but I think it's really important. Vegetation management remains a big issue. Here we have trees that are now dying, pine plantations that are dying and facing disease, unexpected costs. We have a variety of different programs, and those need to be coordinated, I think, with a broader vision of how to move forward into the next 50 years and figure out a way to get the best bang for our buck on that. I'd like to maintain control over our costs as much as possible and keep our dues at a reasonable level. But I also want to maintain the level of service and amenities that we have, and I also want to maintain the really excellent staff that we have. I think that's critically important. I want to see us move forward on getting better broadband service here. I think that's going to be important as the years go by. All of us are using more devices and accessing other programs and information, and I think with the purchase of the cell phone tower, it gives us a step forward where we might have more negotiating power. I'm thrilled to see the solar technology being installed for the office building and the pools, and I'd like to maybe research some other things like biomass. I know we have a problem with vegetation debris. This is a great community, and I think this is a great opportunity to change the board and how we have worked together the last 3 years and get a fresh start, and I would be honored to be able to serve on the board. Thank you.
I was waiting for you. I'm Marti Campbell. I guess since everybody else said how they came here, I will too. I first came to Sea Ranch to celebrate my 40th birthday with some friends from college who lived in Eureka. And Sea Ranch was in the middle, and so we met here, and I really fell in love with the landscape and just thought it was a wonderful place. So 2 years later, when I was interested in getting a second home, since I lived in San Francisco and was a middle-level executive in a bank, this was the first place I looked, and I fell in love with my house and bought it. So I was very happy. I really did not know much about Sea Ranch at all, and I was very fortunate to find that I had landed in a community of people with whom I really felt resonance, and that's continued to be the case in the 22 years that I've been here. From the very beginning of my arrival, I've been involved in a lot of Sea Ranch community activities. Initially, because I was shy, I got on the finance committee. I thought it would be a good way to meet people, and I served on the finance committee for 6 years, and during part of that time I became the chair. Following that, I was elected to the board, and since that time I've served on the board and served on a number of task forces, off and on really throughout the whole time I've been here. Most recently, I've been chair of the Solar Array Task Force for the last 3 years. We worked with staff in a very proactive way to plan and analyze and get approval for the solar panels, which have now been installed on the car barn of the association office building, and which are about to be installed at the water treatment plant. And now we're going forward to analyze the possibility of solar at the 3 rec centers. I really decided to run again for the board because of governance issues. And when I first came here, people like Ann Harriman and John McChesney talked about governance, my eyes glazed over and I didn't know what they were talking about. That time around the early 90s was a time of a lot of acrimony and dysfunction in the board. And starting at about 92, board members and board chairs worked really hard to establish more coherent rules for how we govern ourselves and put some rationality into the process. And what we saw was a period where all the board members didn't agree with each other, but the boards were actually very functional until just a few years ago. I have been concerned with what's gone on in the board the last few years. I was especially concerned when the past board 2 years ago enacted a resolution that allowed them to essentially have serial meetings in secret outside open board meetings so long as they didn't meet face-to-face. So they passed a resolution that said it was okay for them to talk about things, they talk about things so long as they did it on the phone or via email. And this really struck me as very improper. And also, I was joined by many fellow Sea Ranchers. I am anxious to promote open governance here and also to ensure that we have continuity in the kinds of resolutions and policies we put in place. If you've read my first statement, you know that I am a finance professional by training and through my professional career. I've been involved with the Sea Ranch finances and budget since I got here and know a lot about it. I'm fiscally prudent, which doesn't mean I would never spend my money or the Sea Ranch's money, but I think we need to analyze opportunities that come along, communicate well with members, and make sure we really think hard about what we decide to spend our money on. I support working hard to expand our broadband services and the ability of Sea Ranchers to get telephone and cable services, television services, all Sea Ranchers, including those who live in the forest. And there are a number of other issues that I think are important that I'll talk about in the closing statement time, including Burbank housing, vegetation, green energy, and bluff erosion. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We changed the format a little bit this year to have the opening statement be 5 minutes instead of 10. And you can see that they really sharpened their pencils and got concise ideas in place. That was very effective. Okay, now we're ready to start our Q&A. So the ground rules are we have a floor mic over here where you can queue up. Your questions will be limited to 2 minutes. We will have a timer up on the wall that will show 2-minute limit both for the question and for the response from the candidate. So that's, as I said before, when you stand up, you can ask a second question, but you have to go to the end of the line till your turn comes around again. The clock on the wall will guide us on what the 2-minute limit is on these things. I want to ask that when you start a question, you start with, my question for the candidate is. This is not an opportunity to scold or to lecture the candidates. It is not, we don't need to have you share your view on the issue. We're just looking for the candidate's input, and we do not need any historical reviews such as, when I served on the planning committee, we always blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, with that, I would invite your questions, and what you do, you indicate your unit and your lot. There will be a video record of all this, and it'll be available, so we can say your name and where you live, and we'll proceed. Okay, so first question.
My name is Jackie Boss.
The mic.
My name is Jackie.
Still on.
It doesn't seem to matter where this
Yes.
Okay, our crack staff is on the case.
Is this working? I have a question about infrastructure.
Hey, Nance, could you turn up the volume a little bit?
It sounds like it's on.
It can go up.
We do have, okay, I hate to waste time on this. Okay, maybe come up a little closer and kind of turn toward the audience. Yeah, come on up here.
My name is Jackie Boss, and I practically had to make up my unit number. I can never remember where I am. I think it's 35 though. Anyway, 120 Pelican. My question to the candidates is, do you see room for improvement in the budget process? And if so, what specific changes to the budget process would you recommend?
Okay, thank you. And
Process.
so let's start this with Marty and come down the
Okay, is this on? Can you all hear me?
A little closer.
Is this better? Okay. I think it's important to remember that the budget is the community manager's budget. And through the time I've lived here, we've had a variety of different approaches to the budget that have partly followed the community manager's preference and partly followed input from the board. The current community manager initiated a 2-year budget process. I'm comfortable with the 2-year budget process because I think there aren't very many things that change from year to year. Special things come up, like the year in the winter when Hillside fell in underneath Compass Close, but those are unusual. Usually the things that change are the insurance expenses. So I think we can do a 2-year process comfortably. The board the last few years has been less involved in the detail of the budget than prior budgets were. I would expect that I personally would continue to be very actively involved in understanding the line item detail of the budget.
because that's important to me and it's a skill set I have. I don't know whether I would insist that the line item discussion be held jointly in a public meeting if the other board members didn't feel they needed that level of discussion. So I kind of have mixed feelings about how things have evolved in the last couple of years. I think the board sort of ceded a lot of its involvement and direction to the community manager. I was surprised by that. I don't know why they did that. You know, I wasn't there in their discussions with each other. So I would certainly make my opinions known to the community manager in probably a more assertive way than the past budget board did, but I don't think you need to change the budget process to do that.
Okay, Cecilia, would you like to be next? And then Jackie and Elaine.
Yes, it really was up and down the last few years, and I do like the 2-year plan. I think that gives you something to work on. We had some things that were just cemented in, like when the insurance premiums went up, there was nothing we could do to get those reduced. And now that some good things have happened, the lawsuit has been settled. We are maybe before my term is up, another lawsuit for the water company will be settled. So I'm thinking that things are going to kind of stay in a general area where it's not going to be spiky. But I do hope that with more input from the board and the members, and maybe having the discussion earlier in the year than rather coming up like it did this year in February would be beneficial.
Okay, Jackie, please.
Is this on? How about now? I would basically agree with Marty. I think we spent months reviewing the budget in a fairly acrimonious way a couple of years ago, and moving to the 2-year process and fine-tuning it a bit has seemed to work, but I'm not sure there's enough detail now to get a really solid understanding of how everything works. I know I don't have a complete grasp of all of those details. And maybe there's somewhere in between where we can have one meeting that does go into detail beyond having a series of options at the end that can be added or subtracted. I think it needs to be a little bit greater than that, but I think the 2-year process is great.
Okay, thank you. Elaine?
I don't like the 2-year process the way we're doing it right now. I have nothing against a 2-year budget, but at this time we are not looking at the 2nd year at all. We are not scrutinizing it. We have no detail on it when it comes before the Finance Committee or before the board. And even though the resolution approving the budget in the end says that it was scrutinized and that it was looked at, that is not the case. There was no backup materials for 13, 14. So if you want to do a 2-year budget, it should be with the same amount of scrutiny for both of them. And what we're doing right now on the Sea Ranch is carefully looking at the year in front of us and approving this following year, that when we get to it, we just roll it over as if it had been scrutinized. So I definitely think that that needs to be amended. The other thing I think is, as a member of the Finance Committee for 5 years, I really value the expertise of the people on that committee, and I would like to see them used more for their expertise. They have it, that the intention of an advisory committee is to provide a level of expertise that is not shared by the board. And we have wonderful committees on the ranch, including that one, that can give us that advice, and so I would like to make better use of them. But other than that, I'm very happy. Thank you.
Okay. Now, are you comfortable? Should I have the candidates stand up? Can you see them all right, or you're comfortable where we are? Would you prefer to have them stand up? Okay, great. All right, next question.
My name is Don Kemp, and I reside at 191. So my question to the board, or prospective board members, is, as a board member, what would you do to support the expansion of broadband services in our community
let's start with Jackie.
Hey, Jim, would you repeat the question? Cecilia couldn't hear.
Uh,
Repeat it in the microphone.
Mr. Kemp? Mr. Kemp? Could you come and repeat your question, please?
Louder.
Shout into the
Louder.
microphone. Cecilia couldn't hear you.
Come on up here. Down here. Okay, we're losing time. You're talking kind of short.
As a board member, a prospective board member, what would you do to support the expansion of broadband services within our community in general, and in particular, would you be willing to commit community resources to that effort?
Okay, Jackie, would you start, and we'll go down the table then.
I do support the expansion of broadband. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think this is going to be an important amenity, if you want to call it that. I think it's going to become a necessity as the years go by, with more devices that all of us are using, and so much more information, including medical stuff, that's coming that way. I'm pleased about the purchase of the cell phone tower, and I think that income that is generated there could be a source for investment into some sort of improvement. I know there's a subcommittee on the utilities committee working on this, and there are far greater brains understanding the complexities of this subject there than I have. But I know that we are profitable in terms of income from the cell tower, and my understanding is that we're looking at adding other vendors onto that tower that could generate more income, and I think it would be appropriate to look at whether those funds might be able to be invested into expanding the services here.
Okay, Elaine?
I'm absolutely supportive of expanding broadband and wireless on the ranch. And there, like Jackie said, there's a subcommittee of the Utilities Committee that is doing great work. They're meeting with AT&T and Verizon and other things to see what can be done. And so I'm very excited about that. And as a person who lives in the forest on dial-up, I'd say $100 a month wouldn't be too much and an additional assessment. Just kidding, but we may have to, at least initially, spend more money to get broadband on the ranch. I also would look at government grants. In the olden days with the electronic highway, there was money to get internet to rural areas, and now there is money to get broadband to rural areas. And so I hope that there will be some opportunity for that, and the Utilities Committee subcommittee is looking at that too. So.
Okay.
Okay, Don, I believe you're on that subcommittee. I too am supportive of expanding broadband and wireless at the Sea Ranch, but also television and cell phone service, regular telephone service. I think it's shocking, actually, that there are some Sea Ranchers who can't get television in their homes in a way that's good enough to actually watch the TV. You know, that's like, goes back to 1950, you know, which is way not being up to date. I think it's pretty clear that we're never going to be a big population center here in our lifetimes. So there's not going to be a compelling reason for the big national vendors to decide they want to offer state-of-the-art services here. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes out of the Utilities Committee subcommittee, which has excellent people on it. Peter Hughes, Don Kemp, Walt Custer, among others. These are people who really understand what's going on out there. They're very smart. They know how to do research. I am expecting that there will be a time when we'll have to make decisions about what level of community resources to apply to this issue. I think having adequate broadband is really critical to the long-term viability of our community, because I think if we don't have it, younger people under 55 won't buy homes here. And I think we need to have people buy homes here in order to keep this a viable community. If you ask me how much, I would be willing to raise the dues. I really have no idea. I am not a telecommunications expert. I don't have a sense of how much these things would cost, except to know that some of them might be expensive. I think it's something we really need to thrash around about when we come up with some good proposals from the Utilities Committee subcommittee. Thank you.
Okay, Cecilia?
I also am 100% for increasing broadband.
Next question, if you'd please queue up over there so we can
The
go. Sorry, Cecilia.
plan right now is to heighten the Moonraker Tower. That works out, that would be of its benefit, and there's also talk about a tower at the north end of Sea Ranch, or at least near the river. So I am 100% in favor of all of that. I don't think, much as I think it's beautiful here and relaxing, that we can base things on the R&R, that people used to come up here and put on their 33 and a third records and enjoy the weekend. So I think that this will be very, very important, and I am 100% behind having it happen and suffering the consequence of the dues going up a bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, candidates. Good.
Pete Madsen, Unit 30, Lot 23.
I think we can hear you, that's good.
Do you think, asking all the candidates, do you think it's prudent to add $4.50 a month or $445 a year to Sea Ranch member dues to open the Olson Pool during the cold, late fall, winter, and early spring months? And if so, do you have any ideas about, if not, do you have any ideas about how that money might be spent better? And also, should we and how would we evaluate the efficacy of having voted for that in the last meeting? This was my question. And let me add that I'm a regular swimmer. I was there this morning, was the morning before, and I'll be there tomorrow morning. And very, very often, more often than not, especially during this period, late fall, winter, and early spring, there are, more often than not, many lanes available for dedicated swimmers like myself. Thank you.
Okay, don't go away. That was a complex, multi-part question.
Yes.
So maybe you could do, the first two parts of that question were.
Okay. Do you think it's prudent to add $4.50 to member dues and $445 a year to open the pool in the months when it is open pool, when the existing pool is still used? And the second one was, I'm going to actually all that put in the third, skip the last one.
The last one was voting on it at the last meeting.
Yeah, and voting on it at the last meeting. Isn't there a prudent way of evaluating, now that we voted on that, how effective or is that a good idea?
Okay, all right. All right.
Objective.
All right, Elaine, how about you start us on this one, and then we'll go down the table and come back to Jackie.
Well, like I said in my opening statement, I don't think adding that much to the dues should have been considered in the last final budget hearing. It should have been done earlier so that we could have had negotiation time to see if there was other areas where costs could be reduced. Because we had a target of a specific assessment and we just let it go. And the other thing I thought of at the time was that I would have spent it on something else. That when I heard that we were going to spend $4.50, I thought, my gosh, that's the amount of a COLA for 2 years for our staff. And our staff hasn't received a COLA in 3 years. There's no COLA scheduled in the 12-13 budget, and there's none in the 13-14 budget. That's 5 years without a COLA, and yet we're expanding the hours, and we have limited, amount of use in that season. So I would just like to have researched it earlier. There was a big demand for it, and if it was, weighed and considered against our other needs, then I would go ahead. But the way it was done, it seemed to be done really fast and without thinking what we were doing.
Okay.
like $48 a year and not $450.
Oh, you're right.
So I'll answer the easy part of the question first. No, I don't think this should have come up at the last budget meeting. The group of people who signed the petition have been bringing this before the board in the budget hearings every year for the last few years, and it could very easily have been introduced sooner, and I think it should have been. For those of you who know me, this is kind of a complex question for me because I too am a regular swimmer, and one of the reasons I chose to buy in this community is that it had swimming pools, and I need them for my mental and physical health. I was on the board when the decision to build the Del Mar pool was made after a great deal of analysis and community discussion. It cost, I think, just around $1 million. We saved for it over a number of years with modest dues increases. The intention at that time was not to then close one of the other pools after this one was built. So I was not on the board when the decision was made to close the Olson pool in the winter. I didn't like that decision. On the other hand, if I had been on the sitting board and somebody had said to me, you get a gift of $4.50 a month in the dues to spend however you would like, I probably would not have spent it on opening the Olson pool. And I was surprised that the budget hawks on the board all voted in favor of this. At the same time, so I personally, as a member, am happy that it's going to be open. I know sea ranchers who live here full-time who do not swim on the weekends because there's so much weekend activity at the pools. I think it's important to have open amenities that we have. There were other issues related to staffing and cost of overtime that made it seem appropriate to the community manager that we open the pool. Those are things that we should consider, something I have mixed feelings about.
Okay. Cecilia?
Yes, I take full responsibility for having that little introduction in the last agenda. And if you remember, I recommended leaving the pool open for 7 months rather than the 5 that it was open. And then we were given the statistics and the information showing how it's not appropriate to be opening and closing because that also costs. So it came eventually out that it would be better to have it open year-round, but that would then cost more because of the kind of people we need to maintain it, do the chemicals and so forth. And by the end of that long meeting, the agreement was made to spend almost $5. My personal feeling right now is, having been an advocate for having more months open, maybe not 12, wait to see what happens at the end of the year. If there is not more use, which I fully expect there to be, because I think people that think, oh, well, I don't need to drive in, see if it's open, drive out, go up to Del Mar. If they know for sure that it's open, I'm hoping that it'll be used more. That may not be the case. And Pete, I don't know if you like swimming at the Olson pool, but in any case, I know it's a big expense, and I'm sorry about that, but I think that when you have a pool, you should have it open and available for the members. So let's give it the 12 months. Thank you.
Okay.
I was at that meeting and listened to the arguments and was aware, having sat in budget meetings for the last several years, that this was not the first year to come up. I heard Marty speak about the research that was done on needing Del Mar pool built based on the idea that Olson would remain open, and that was important in my thinking. I was definitely swayed by John Prescott saying that their certified pool operators were working overtime every week, and I thought that was not a good situation to be in, and whether we opened the pool for 3 months or 6 months, we were still going to have to hire another person. And then the numbers from a survey of users were part of the documentation the board reviewed that day. And I just happened to look at these the other day, and I believe it said that in 2011, Moonraker Pool had 3,000 users. In the short period of time Olson was open, it had 8,500. And Del Mar, I think, had 25 or 26,000. So considering that, I thought, well, if it was open for double the amount of time, potentially those numbers could go up. and that would justify keeping Olson open more than not because of the potential for increased users. However, I was pleased to see on the front of the bulletin that this is going to be a test period, and if those user numbers don't go up, then maybe that subject should be revisited. In terms of how I might spend the money otherwise, the work of the Commons Landscape Committee is the first thing that comes to my mind, as well as the broadband we talked about, to be able to make the commons improvements that each neighborhood is generating from that process.
Marty always catches me on math issues. It's $54, not $40.
Okay, let's, thank you for that. And let's go to the next question.
Jody Sparks, 27 and 24. And my question for the candidates goes to, well, I'm trying.
Get closer.
Okay, I'll go up there.
Can I get this?
Jody Sparks, 2724. And my question to the candidates goes to the issue of executive session. And I would like to know from each of you what your understanding is of what should and shouldn't be discussed in executive session of the board, and what each of you would do to ensure that only those items that should be discussed in executive session are.
All right, Cecilia, let's start with you and then come to Jackie and Lily.
Didn't you start the whole stuff? Yeah. Okay. I think I can't read that.
Okay.
Did I?
Usually, we were told, and this is what has been in the past, has to do with, anything to do with personnel, anything to do with legal. And I'm trying to think if there was anything crucial that came up. I think the difficulty is that because these things are not supposed to be spoken or breathed outside the room when you leave, that it has to be very cautiously mandated so that the agenda are only subjects that must be kept secret, if that's the word I want to use. So I'm not quite sure what the answer would be to your question, Jody, but my feeling is that most all of the things that have come up in executive session seem to belong there.
Okay.
I've never been in an executive session, so I'm not sure what they've been told, but I would assume that it's what Cecilia has said about both legal and personnel issues are those items discussed most appropriately. I'm in favor of as much being discussed openly as possible, and would encourage that, and I would hope that we could do it in a way that was more of a discussion than a debate, because I think the more informed people are, the better decisions they can make, and I think that those of you sitting in the audience, myself included up until this run for the election, we want more information, and the board meetings is the only place that you really get it, and if more information can be available, then I think that's better for everybody.
Okay, Elaine?
Yes, it is personnel issues, legal issues, contracts, maybe you can call contracts legal issues. But anyway, from my experience being on boards, I know what is appropriate for executive session and what is not. And if there were things that they wanted to discuss in executive rather than in the open meeting, I would tell them, no, this is a matter for the open session. It's very important to keep the executive session to as small amount of matters as possible, just for that openness and transparency that we want in open government.
In addition to the things, actually, the things you can talk about in executive session are listed in the Davis-Sterling Act, which is the state law that governs homeowners associations. And in addition to the things that Elaine mentioned, the additional things are member discipline, which is not some weird S&M thing, but it has to do with if somebody's really breaking the rules in a serious way, and the board needs to speak to them, that can be done in an executive session. And so can negotiations for payment of back dues, that can also take place in executive session. I should say that recently, in the last several years, the board has often discussed contract items in public where there was no reason to have them not be in public. For example, the choice of the investment banker for the water company decision, and also I think the choice of the headhunter when the search for Frank Bell was about to be initiated for the new community manager. Those things have been conducted in public where the board could have legally decided to do those in executive session, and they chose not to, and I think that's a good thing.
All right, good. Let's see, so would you like to go ahead and then we'll take our break?
Sure. Is this one working? Or should I come up there?
Well, come on up. Sorry for the delay up here, but.
Hi, I'm Robert Wolf, 34A40, and this question is about the idea of the political independence, or the independence of the design committee. And some members of the board seem to have the feeling that any real criticism, and this is only my impression, I could be really wrong because I haven't listened to detailed back and forth on some of these issues, but do you feel that the board has a role to play in looking at the issues that the design committee has addressed, and look at the decision and look at the point of view of the appellant, because this is usually to come before the board as I think a state mandated or prescribed step prior to mediation and prior to ultimate suing, where a member of the association has the right to, again, bring up his point of view. But if the idea, so does the board feel it has a role in reviewing in detail these decisions, or do you just tend to automatically go ahead and rubber stamp the ideas and the decisions of the design committee because you don't want to seem to be interfering?
Marty, we're back to you as our lead-off person. Each candidate is led off once. Do you want to take a shot?
Oh, you're back to me.
The CC&Rs draw a very clear distinction between what the role of the design committee is as opposed to what the role of the board is with regard to design decisions. And the restrictions give the design committee authority to establish the design standards and also to establish rules for how they work. I can't cite you the actual sections of the restrictions because I don't remember the numbers, but it's very clearly in there. When state law changed to require that boards hear appeals for members, the way our resolution was written was an attempt to honor what was in the restrictions and still honor the intention of the state to be sure that members were treated fairly. And in our procedure for handling appeals from members about design issues, the board is authorized to evaluate whether or not the member was, and in the context of their project, was handled fairly, that all the rules were followed, that it was timely, that they were listened to. So it's an administrative decision on the board's part. The board is not authorized to second guess the aesthetic judgments of the design committee. And currently the board shouldn't be doing that, and there have not been very many appeals. I think I've been either on the board or in the audience for all the ones that have been held, and none of those boards try to second guess the design committee's aesthetic decisions. They did pay attention to whether or not the member was treated fairly and whether the design standards were explained clearly to the member.
Okay, good. So let's go to Cecilia and back to Jackie and Elaine.
I would agree with Marty that in the 3 years I was on the board, there was only one time that a member came to the board with some disagreement with what the design committee had said. And it wasn't particularly about the treatment or the fairness of the treatment. It had more to do with timing. And so I think that if we keep that separation pretty clear and that there is some place that these things can be discussed with the design committee and the member and iron out some of the little minor things that come up, I think you can keep it the way it is, and we're not going to have a rush of people coming to the board with complaints about the decisions of the design committee.
Okay, Jackie, thank you.
My understanding of the rules is exactly what Marty and Cecilia said, is that the board can review process but not aesthetic decisions. I had my own business for 20 years as a commercial interior designer specializing in healthcare facilities, and we had a saying that the only thing two architects could agree on was how bad the third one was. And I think if the board were to weigh in on aesthetic decisions, it would be worse than it is now. However, all joking aside, I've been through the process a couple times myself, and the simple act of a one-car garage reduced me to tears of frustration. So I understand that the process is often painful, but I can see and understand, having been in that business, that there has to be a group of people that can make those decisions without the political interference of the board. So as frustrating and painful as it can be sometimes, I think it is appropriate that they don't weigh in on those aesthetic decisions, and we allow that to be made by the professionals.
Okay, Elaine?
And I would just add to all that we need to continue to work with the communication between our design review committee and the members and the board. It's a constant process of refining and doing, and I think that that's something that's very important to all of us, and we keep talking about it, and I think we keep working on it, and we need to continue to do that.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you very much. Now, so the question is now, procedure. This is when we would have our break, where we could take a break and come back at 4:15. Or if you'd like to just continue, if we can continue to do that, and we can, whatever is a good fit. Are people ready for a break, or do you want to, we go to the next question? All right, we'll take a break. I want to be back here. Wait, no? Okay, we're not going to do a show of hands. We're going to do, if you need a break, you can tiptoe out, but let's keep asking questions and let's keep rolling.
Hey, Jim, are you going to go until 5 o'clock? If we're going to go at 5 o'clock, I need a break.
Okay, time out. We are now going to take a break, and we'll be here at 4:15. I'm listening to the pulse of the nation here. Sounds like it's on, but it's not. All right, thank you. And our candidates and everyone else, I think the break was a good idea. I'm glad we did that. And that was plan A. We did a quick switch to plan B, back to plan A, so that was great. All right, so let's go ahead and start.
Let's see if it works. Jack Nabel, 2884. My question is, do you see any need for improvement of the notifications that neighbors get when things are done on property? Our experience has been that notification doesn't happen, and then decisions of the DCEM are treated has design committee decisions which are unappealable by neighbors, and so there's no way to participate in the process.
Okay. Let's see. Jackie, do you want to start us off on this one? And then we'll just go down the table.
Okay. For clarification on the subject, I believe what you're referring to is notification about trees being planted. And you and I had talked previously about this, and I did check with the association, and there is no notification sent out when a tree is planted, and there is no notification sent out when a tree is removed. And so what I had heard before, I believe there's only notifications sent out for construction. Yeah.
Tree removal.
They've done, Frank told me no.
Is it okay if I say, even though it's not my turn?
Yes, sure.
Go ahead.
Okay, with me.
I mean, they do send notices out for tree projects, because I've gotten some.
I've gotten.
Let's see, I don't know that we don't have a member of the staff here to comment on that, but they do go out for there are multiple events that they go out on, even certainly for tree proposals. Let's see, I don't know how we can clarify that. Well, let's go down, what is your understanding, and we may have to get a ruling on.
Well, I guess I can wrap up by saying, when you and I talked, I took it seriously and I did try to do some research. It sounds like I got bad information, and I will definitely check on that again. But I think it is reasonable that people should be notified when there is plantings being made, and I think it's probably reasonable when plantings are being removed. Those can have major impacts on the environment around a home, and I think it might be best to allow that to happen.
Okay.
Well, I know they send out a notice about tree removal because I got back from a vacation to Europe about 2 years ago, and there was a letter from DCEM to me saying that I had a fine of $1,000 and something because I had a tree removed on my land, and I was shocked. And it turned out it was a tree that PG&E removed on my land, and it wasn't me. And so I do know that you know, not only do you get, permission to do it, but you also, the neighbors are notified. But I don't know what our number of feet is for our notification, how close you have to be, but.
But see, if we don't have they're pretty clear guidelines on when they go out and when the 300-foot applies. So if we don't have it, we shouldn't just spend time wandering here. Can either ex-members speak to?
James, when I'm about to
Oh, okay.
say something that I heard in the planning meeting the last planning committee meeting, I believe this was discussed about what distance it should be for notification. And they talked about how if you made it too far out, it got complicated, and too close, people didn't know. I certainly think it's an area that could use further exploration and clarification for us on the Sea Ranch.
My information is old, so the rules may have changed. I believed it was 300 feet, and that it applied to tree removal as well as any kind of construction. But I don't know the complete list of all the things it applies to. And it's much better than what they do in San Francisco.
That's not hard.
All right, well, let's be brief since we don't have the guidelines right
Yes,
here.
because we don't have the exact information in front of us, it's hard to say, but I do remember that it was 300 feet for structures, and I thought also it was the same for trees. It would depend on the questioners, was the tree a situation on private property or on commons, I think that you are notified if they do something on commons also. So I think all of us have to do some more homework on
Right, I
this.
think that's the message on that one. I think the guidelines are in place, they just need to be reviewed and maybe explored. Okay, next.
Betty Covington, Unit 21, Lot 48. This is a question for Cecilia. Since you are the only member running for the board who is an incumbent, I wonder if you could explain what you feel your major contributions have been in the 3 years that you've been on the board.
The contributions I've made have actually happened, a lot of them, without my input, because they were the resolution of the Hills case, which, I wasn't involved intricately in that. But I do think that the things that I have voted for are helpful. The solar array, I think, is very important. I think that I know I voted in favor of buying the Moonmaker Tower property, and I consider that when there are issues, as some of the other candidates have said, among members on the board, that the biggest asset you have is this. You vote yes or you vote no. And I think that that is the thing that when I read this information, and as I mentioned before, that this is going to be a little bit easier for me because I have read so much. I think that one time my husband John, he's in favor of my doing this, but he thought I was reading about 24 hours a week on some of the issues. So if you're informed and you really vote your conscience, I think that you can do the right thing. And so in answer to your question, Betty, I think that a lot of good things have happened since I've been on the board, but I'm not going to take credit personally for all of them.
Okay, next question.
Yes, Chris Smith, 2122. Some of you have said that you're comfortable with the 2-year budgeting process. On the other hand, you've also said you're not clear on exactly what goes into it. If I calculate just roughly, the dues are going to be going up 16% or so in the next 2 years. 16% in the next 2 years. And I've also heard talk about how much money is going to be spent doing this, that, and the other in the next couple of years. So I'd just like to know exactly what each of you were planning to do to hold the dues, or even surprisingly reduce them. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, Elaine, it's your turn to lead us off, and we'll go down the table, back to Jackie.
Okay, well, as a member of the Finance Committee, I do know what our budget is, and I don't know that they're going up 16% for 2 years. I would be shocked. But like I say, we have only looked at this coming year's budget. We did not review the 13-14 budget, so maybe I don't know that. I certainly don't want to see the dues go up that much, and I don't think they need to go up, especially radically, because costs are flat, costs are not going up, and they should reflect like the cost of living adjustment. They should only go up as much as that is. And I do see places in the budget where costs could be cut, and I'm very good at comparing things and getting them out there so that we can decide with consensus whether we'd rather have this or we'd rather have that. And I have a lot of experience in doing that, and I would bring that to my service on the board.
Okay. Go ahead, Marty.
I don't find the question of, let me figure out how to say this. I don't think the question of reducing the dues is the right question. I think the question is, what service level do we want, and how do we support that through the budget process? Frank Bell, the community manager, said in the last budget meeting that with the exception of the swimming pool add-on, that he could not come up with a lower budget unless we decided not to do something to reduce the service level. And I believe what he said. I think he's a very smart guy. I think he has an outstanding financial staff. I think he did a lot of work on the budget. So I don't have any reason to think that what he said is not true. I personally do not support reducing the service level. We have talked today about some things that we thought it was important to add. For example, broadband service. I think that supporting broadband service could cost some money, and I think we need to have a very thorough analysis done and a vetting process before we would decide to add that level of service to what we do now, if we need to support that with our dues. So I think the best way I can answer your question is to say that I don't support reducing the service level. When you look at the multi-year outlook on the dues, one of the things that's missing from the forward years is this carryover that we tend to end up with from year to year, where if we have unspent monies in the current year, that then reduces the following year budget. We will have unspent monies at the end of this current year if the, oh, I take that back, that's on the water company's side. If there's money left over at the end of this coming fiscal year, it will reduce the dues the year out, but that's not included in the planning documents because you can't anticipate that will happen, but it happens every year.
All right, thank you. Cecilia?
I think the one thing that is going to affect the dues staying maybe where they are or even going up slightly is the difficulty with the vegetation. I think that there's no way, unless some of you are really experienced in getting a huge tree that has bark beetle problems down. So I think that that is hanging over our heads a little bit. That's not to say that we couldn't do something more succinctly by having DCEM, the members, the fuel management group, all of these people just get in there and say, yep, this is a dead tree. We don't need to discuss it. We know it's dead. We're going to have to pay to get it out. However that works out, whether it's on private property, in which case you'd have to do it, or whether it's the association's obligation. But I do think with that hanging over our head right now, that that is going to be a cost. Whether or not all of us that want to get rid of the dead trees want to go swimming more often in the Hudson Pool is a different story.
Okay, Jackie?
When Frank made his final presentation on the budget this year, I believe he said that our operating fund was going up less than 1%. And I believe that the increase came from insurance costs, which have risen because of past legal issues. I think Marty's absolutely correct. This year, it's going up for two reasons. We have a problem with Del Mar Pool. That's $90,000 out of sequence that needs to be funded in advance of when we thought it would be. And we've had unforeseen problems with the bark beetle that resulted in some extenuating costs not planned for. We need to have flexibility to be able to deal with things like that. And I think if you cut too much, you get yourself into trouble, like we talked about with the pool operators. I agree with Marty that we keep a level of service rather than a level of dues. We don't have control over things like our propane costs, which have been going up, gasoline, insurance, various things like that. So we need to agree that we have a level of service we're comfortable with and stay with that. The second year in the budget does not reflect that carryover, and it also doesn't reflect that we have hopefully pending resolution of the water rights issue, which should bring some cash into the coffers to reimburse us for expenses we've had in the past, and that would be a positive thing on the cash flow as well. So, but I think I would agree that the question is not what the dues are, but what level of service do we want to have here, and how do we gather around the core values and the things that we find important as a community and support those.
Okay, very good. All right, yeah. All right, next question.
Yeah, Robert Scarola, 35D1. I have a question that kind of ties into that. I was just asked, and I was wondering if you as a member of the board would be not supportive, but even excited by innovative and, the word comes to mind, synergistic ways of increasing revenues so that we can offset some of these issues that have to do with education and other things as a way to control the dues, rather than just working on the having to reduce the budget. Could we be more proactive, and how would you be more proactive to actually help Sea Ranch work with some of the things we've done, like in the utility company and other things, to actually come up with plans and ways of actually generating more revenues? Because I think that's one of the keys to keeping our dues control.
Okay, now, according to my scorekeeping here, each of you has let off a question twice. So let's come back to Marty on this third round to be our lead-off person.
Robert, about 4 years ago, I think, the Finance Committee had a series of member meetings to generate ideas for revenue. And were you on the Finance Committee then? There were 45, I think, that were raised, and the Finance Committee evaluated every single one of them. And we really didn't come up with much. So my answer to your question is that I'm open to ideas for revenue generation, but in the recent past, we did a pretty extensive effort to accumulate ideas from lots of members, and a number of members came to those meetings. I have in my notes somewhere how many. It wasn't as many as, it was probably about as many as are here today. So it was a pretty substantial number. And we just didn't come up with anything that was going to generate, a reasonable amount of revenue. So I certainly am not opposed to that, but I don't think it's probably something that I would personally devote a lot of energy to, largely because we just recently went through that effort, and nothing unfolded.
Okay, let's come back to Jackie and go down the table that way.
I remember those meetings, and there were ideas about selling caps and t-shirts and stuff and competing with the lodge, and there were a lot of different ideas. I would certainly be open to new ideas, but I don't think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that we haven't already tried to grab. It's always advantageous if we can lower the dues or keep costs controlled, but we are a homeowners association more responsive to a homeowners area as opposed to having a lot of ways to generate new revenue. The one place that might be different is the cell phone tower, the Moonraker Tower, and I am excited by the potential for some revenue there. But then again, I think that we have other ways that money could be invested to benefit the community.
Okay.
So I'm delighted you asked that question because I had a follow-up to Chris's question about the dues going up. And one of the things I remembered was that our cell phone tower, we're spending $100,000 a year for 4 years to pay off the cost of the tower. And so that adds a chunk to our assessment each year. And we're only bringing in $32,000 in leases, so we have this net difference. But once those 4 years are up, it's going to be all revenue, and it should be going up and up. We are going to develop a business plan and decide how to best market that, and we have a lot of people that are interested in being on our tower. So that is going to be one good source of revenue, and of course we'll keep looking for others, but definitely we'd like that rather than having to increase the assessment, even though the assessment is obviously our largest source of income.
Cecilia?
The only time it came up since I've been on the board was about increasing the rent to use the Del Mar Center for personal social events, and that seemed to be the only opportunity. I do know that if any of you have a chance to go up to Verdant View and see the new solar array, and if anyone is around there, Randy especially, he could show you how that is bringing, how we're not using electricity and we're actually accumulating it. And I think eventually that maybe, between the solar array and the tower, we will have income, and it should maybe keep our dues down a little bit.
Okay, good. Now, at 4:40, we're going to start the closing statements. So, Rob, do you have your question?
Okay, hi, Rob D. from Black, Unit 21. Question specifically to Ms. Reed. Answering an earlier question, you said you had some specific ideas for cutting costs. I wonder if you'd like to share some of those thoughts with us.
I'm always warned not to get into numbers too much because people's eyes glaze over. Let me think. Well, one thing I would like to do is separate out the cell tower cost and expenses so that people can see the whole package of it separately. I would. Why don't we go on to another question and come back? Can you come back to that in the next question, if that's fair?
That's the question I had, is do you have specific thoughts to share with us?
I know, I do have specific, but let me think about them while we're doing the next question, and I'll answer you afterwards. Can I have 2 minutes to think about it?
Yeah, obviously the rest of the crowd would like to hear it too.
I know, I'm going to answer.
I'll leave that up to the
Okay.
forum.
All right, are there more questions?
You've all talked about what you have been doing and how you view different things today. I'd like to hear from each of you what's your view of what the Sea Ranch should be going forward, and how you feel you could influence that.
Okay, there's, let's see. This would start with Jackie. This is your turn to start. And then we'll just go down the table.
This is something I have not thought about or prepared for.
Those are the best of them.
In looking back, I think this remains a stellar community that has been innovative in its thinking and how it governs itself, how we've treated the natural surroundings, the ways that we've looked at reducing our impact on the land, like with the solar array projects. I think that we have staff and volunteers in the community that can lead that effort into the future and continue to find new and innovative ways to move forward and still respect the land and maintain that special quality that we have here. I don't have anything specifically in mind, especially with no warning to think about it, but I remain impressed with the things that we have here, the barn and the theater plays, the musical groups that come here from time to time. The trails are amazing. We have so many lovely aspects to this community that have been developed over the last 50 years. I have no worries that it's going to continue in a positive way.
I too want to continue Sea Ranch the way it is because I feel that that is what the community wants, and I want it also, and that's why I feel like I'm a good fit for this position, that we all share a love of the place the way it is, although we recognize that there will be changes and challenges. We all want to maintain the services, well, I say all, in general. We want to maintain our level of services and amenities, and we want to keep our assessment as low as possible by being creative and frugal in our budgeting. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
I guess I'd like to answer your question in kind of two parts. One part is that I had the good fortune to participate both in 1993 and the 2003 Halberd workshops. The first one shortly after I arrived here. And one of the things that impressed me about both of those workshops was the extent to which sea ranchers who attended had a common vision of what the Sea Ranch should be. And I was especially struck in the second one, the one in 2003, where he asked for a show of hands of how many people who had been sea ranchers for less than 5 years, and about half the people in the group raised their hands. So it appears to, I think the Sea Ranch attracts people who, and retains people who have the same sort of core values that were the foundation of the Sea Ranch in the first place. I'm looking forward to the 50th anniversary year because I think the Vision Committee is planning activities that will generate and draw out that kind of energy from people involved in all kinds of activities at the Sea Ranch. And I think that will be a good guide for the board as well in thinking about what kind of community we want this to be. And the second part of my answer is, I think, as I thought about this whole issue of improving broadband and the way the larger world is changing to become more electronic, I think that's kind of an example of ways in which we can integrate what's happening in the larger community into our community to be sure that we stay viable as we go forward and that we don't become a shuttered rural community like the ones in Oklahoma where I grew up, where their heyday was in 1928. So I'm looking forward to the anniversary year for that, and I would be delighted to be on the board during that process.
Cecilia?
Yes, the main thing that I see that might be a problem is infilling. I think as more and more homes are built in areas where there are a healthy number of homes already, it's a little bit crunchy. But I don't think that could not be combated by a real good dialogue between the new incoming member or owner who wants to build and, go out and sit down on a camp chair and say, look about this, look at this tree, and you could do a good job. I also attended Mr. Halpin's 2003 workshop, and the thing that still sticks with me is when he jumped up out of his seat when a new owner came and said, I think it would be a little nicer if the meadow was a little more modest and cut closer and on. And he just jumped up out of his seat and he said, nature is not neat. So I'm kind of hoping that we can stick with the nature is not neat philosophy. We can still accommodate infilling, and I agree with Marty that the 50th anniversary will probably bring people back to what the dream was. Not to make it like it was before, I'm not saying to go retro, but see what the dream was.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you. Elaine, you want to comment on closing statement?
Rob, you come back?
Yeah.
I just want to say I am thinking about this too much. The budget was 6 weeks ago, and I have put it behind me. I know when I get home, I will remember several things that I thought of that could be reduced, but I'm sorry they're not in my head right at this moment, so I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, we're going to move now to closing statements. This is a 5-minute close maximum. And the order here on closing is that Marty will lead off. Elaine Reed will be second, Jackie Gardner third, and Cecilia will be fourth. So Marty?
Okay, I'm going to continue on with a couple of additional areas of focus for me and then wrap up. In my opening statement, I ran out of time and didn't talk about Burbank housing. Like Jackie Gardner, I think it's important that we be at the table in the discussion about Burbank housing. I think the situation is very complicated. If there were an easy answer, the answer would have been reached by now. But I do think that they're in an untenable situation and something will happen. I would like to see us be firmly at the table in the discussions that they're having with the county and the other interest groups that they have to deal with to resolve their situation. I think it is likely to not be totally pretty for us. I'm very supportive of the ongoing efforts to deal with vegetation issues here. we asked for the association to give us a spreadsheet of the costs that we're spending on tree removal and other kinds of vegetation issues. And over the last decade or so, we have spent between $350,000 and $500,000 a year on tree removal, more often on around the $350,000 range. That's about the same amount of money we spend on the roads, and those two projects together are the largest single projects that we undertake on an ongoing basis. I think members tend not to be aware that we're spending that much money on managing the vegetation. The community manager has made it a commitment to figure out a better way to present those numbers to the membership during the budget process so that going forward it will be more clear how much money we're spending. As we approach how to deal with the vegetation issues, there's always a trade-off between how much money we're willing to spend and what problem it is we're trying to solve. The association has largely focused on fire management, and I find that appropriate. I'm a big supporter of the Commons Landscape Committee process. I think it's a fabulous opportunity to get through the whole ranch, and with the involvement of the neighbors who know each neighborhood the best, made some decisions about issues related to the landscape aesthetic issues, as well as fire or view issues, and develop plans that can then inform the decisions of the design committee going forward. I also would like to see us resolve a hanging issue with the county about bluff erosion on the public access trails, which are the northernmost 3 miles of the bluff trail. When I was on the board before, more than 4 years ago, we were trying to get the county to accept a proposed set of easement language that would protect our right to continue owning commons if we allowed the county trail to be rerouted onto commons. We never received an answer from the county, and I would like to see us close that loop. The county obviously, with the downturn, has a lot of other issues that I'm sure are more important to them, but I think to us we should try to protect our rights to own our property. I'd like to thank you all again for coming. I'd like to encourage you to read our second statements when they are mailed out with the ballots. I'll talk about the issues in my platform more in my second statement. Although many people think this election this year is not as critical as maybe some past elections have been, I would really encourage you to vote and to encourage your neighbors and friends to vote. I think a 3-candidate year is always a really important year. And please vote, and we'll look forward, I'm sure all 4 of us will look forward to serving you.
Because we only had 5 minutes at the start, we have to use some of this time for more of our statement and then our closing. I spent my career working in the public sector. As the county library director, I was an appointed county official, and I worked with city governments regarding library service in their jurisdictions. I worked with other agencies and nonprofits regarding library service. I reported to the County Board of Supervisors and to the Library Advisory Board. I served on the Mountain Valley Library System Board, a regional consortium of public, academic, special, and school libraries that considered library issues in the region, as a member and as an officer for about 12 years. And I was a member of the California County Librarians Association, which was an organization that addressed issues regarding public library service in California, as a member and an officer for 13 years. From my experience, I am familiar with how boards operate, Robert's Rules of Order, open meeting laws, noticing requirements, etc. I'm comfortable working with counties, cities, and other public agencies, and I also know a lot about library service in California, but that's not too pertinent here. About Burbank housing. For several years, Burbank housing has had problems with deteriorating houses and high operating costs. Solutions to their problems have eluded them, the association, and the county. After 2 proposals for addressing the problems were unsuccessful last year, an ad hoc committee was formed to continue to look for solutions. These 11 Sea Ranchers have backgrounds in planning, development, affordable housing, contracting, and other related areas. They have worked hard, but so far they haven't found a viable solution. I'm optimistic with their concerted efforts, more board involvement, and better collaboration with Burbank Housing and Sonoma County that we'll be able to resolve this difficult situation soon. It's imperative that we do. It's gone on too long. As a board member, I hope I can contribute to resolving the situation. I like challenges. I care very much about people having adequate housing. I love home improvement projects, and I love William Turnbull Jr.'s architecture. When I was a member of the Rotary Club of Auburn, one of my favorite projects that we did was our semi-annual This Old House project. A group of 20 to 30 of us would spend a weekend or 2 fixing up the house of an elderly or disabled person. We would transform it. We painted, did minor plumbing and electrical repairs, roofing, replaced the decks, cleaned up the garden. It was so worthwhile and so satisfying. I would love it if the Burbank solution could include some volunteer work. I was encouraged to run for the board of directors by several good friends active in Sea Ranch governance. They know who they are. I had thought about running someday, but I wasn't thinking this year. They persuaded me that this was the time. I view these people with their experience and their confidence in my qualifications as the backbone of my support. The rest of my support comes from my colleagues on the Sea Ranch and RCMS finance committees and my many friends and neighbors. First they said, "Are you nuts?" And then they said, "You'll make a good director. You have my vote." If elected, I promise I will work thoughtfully, diligently, and collegially in considering the board of directors' business. I would enjoy the opportunity of serving on the board immensely, and I hope you will vote for me. Thank you.
I can see some heavy eyelids, so this will not take 5 minutes. I think that I have the qualifications to serve on the board and to do so in a business-like and in a business-like manner. I have the temperament. I have a history of being able to work with others, and I will listen to all sides of every situation. I'm logical and pragmatic, probably to a fault. I'm prepared. I do my homework. I read everything. I will do first-hand research, and I will get back to Frank Bell about the bad information he gave me. I've attended a lot of meetings over the years, and I feel like I have a good basic understanding of how the governance here works, and I think I can work within the system and the rules that we have. I believe I have the skills. I ran my own business for 20 years. I'm organized, and I'm budget conscious. And maybe most important, I have the desire. I want to do this. I think I can be a good representative of all of you on the board, and I'm asking you today to support me and give me your vote. Thank you.
The last time, I would like to say that we should be more open about where the money goes, and I think our community manager is in favor of that. Just when somebody comes up and tells you you've just spent a couple $1 million on trees, it would be nice to know when you read in the bulletin where the money goes so that you don't feel like you're feeding a fund that has an opening at the bottom and you have no recourse. About Burbank Housing, they have beautiful buildings in Sonoma County. I don't know if any of you have ever visited them. There are other facilities, and they are impressive. And so I think that that kind of talent could be maybe garnered and put into the Sea Ranch Apartments. Maybe we sort of have to have something like a Habitat for Humanity and have people go over and volunteer. But once it was done and maintained, I think that it would be an opportunity for us to have a cohesive agreement between the two organizations, our association and Burbank Housing. My career as a teacher started, if you can believe this, when Watson and Crick found the double helix, and that was when we first knew all about genetics. And so it's been a long time from that to now where we have DNA. But I transferred out of teaching and went into technical editing, and I worked for a savings and loan, and that was a challenge that would really outdo teenagers in a high school science fair. So I hope some of you found my grammar error in my first statement, and if you did, please let me know, and then I'll sort of remember those technical writing days. But I do feel that with the forward-looking way that I see Sea Ranch going, and the things that I remember, and all the emotional connection we have with our grandchildren coming up every year, will keep us focused on the magnificent place that Sea Ranch is, and we won't get bogged down in some of the trivia. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much. We have a marvelous slate of candidates. I think we can be impressed with their preparation and their performance here today. So let's give them one big round of applause. I'd like to thank the Forum Committee and thank you in the audience for your one incisive questions.
And I'd like another round of applause for Jim for doing this. He said this year he wanted to sit in the audience, but we're talking to him. And also to Walt, who is recording this, so if anybody wants to be in touch with Walt.
Can I make a comment? We're going out of town Monday. So if you want a copy, send me an email, custer@mcn.org, quickly, so that we have enough for everybody.
Great.
If you send it Tuesday, it's going to be too late.
Here's your chance, you heard that. And one little more last thing about elections. It has nothing to do with the Sea Ranch, but it does have to do with our community. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday for the two propositions about health care and after-hours care. So we'll keep that in mind, and the Olson Ranch Center will be the polling place. Thank you. And the next forum, as we mentioned earlier, will be on the internet and what you would like it to be and what it can become. So put that on your calendar for the first Saturday in May. Yes, Jim just reminded me to ask everybody to please pick up their chair, and I would ask you, since we didn't use all the chairs, since this was a pretty day and people were outside, would you pick up 2 chairs, each one of you, and take it back? Thank you.